Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 21 of Spy Family. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So I do believe that this is going to be one of my favorite episodes, just because of all the neat little character interactions we're going to get. Right at the start, it seems as though Handler is handing off a job to good old Fiona Frost, who I believe we've seen briefly at the hospital. She is an interesting character. In Spy Family, she's just a side character, but I think archetypically there's, I don't know what you call it, like a hole in the market. Like there is a demand for this character, at least in my own mind. I feel like there's mileage here that's not being fully utilized. But, enough of that for right now. Like, at the very least, Fiona is interesting. She's sort of intimating that she's not above underhanded tactics. She seems to think she would be better as a part of Operation Strix, and, wouldn't it be a real shame if something accidentally happened to Mrs. Forger, and then, I could replace her. Obviously, that would torpedo the whole mission if that were to come to pass. But, to be honest, I don't think Yor would actually allow something like that to happen. I feel like if it really came down to it, Yor would probably have not much of an issue putting Fiona in her place. So, we're being set up here that she's like a really ambitious, career-driven person, but that's not necessarily the entire story. So, per usual, it seems like Yor didn't do a remarkably good job of cooking breakfast. So, the status quo and all that. I feel like life is going to get interesting when Fiona decides to share the details of her new mission with Lloyd, seeing as how they have to work together. The director was very clear that this isn't to interfere with Operation Strix, but I can't help but feel that knowing how career-driven Fiona seems to be, she might do something a little bit underhanded. So naturally, she's keeping up her cover that she's a co-worker. Alright, so she's got, a little bit of a reason for dropping by. It's like, oh yeah, Anya left this at the hospital, I'm just dropping it off. But I feel like she's sort of taking advantage of yours good nature to, sit inside and wait for Lloyd, I feel like this is almost like that, like, hey, I've been expecting you, turns around in the swivel chair kind of thing when you enter the room. Like, oh, Lloyd, what a surprise. So naturally, Fiona is, she's scheming already. And that she would find Yor by herself. I'm wondering if Fiona did that by design. The idea being that she's scoping out the competition, as it were. I mean, Yor has no idea what's going on, spies or otherwise. She just thinks, like, this is a colleague. I need to be polite, give her coffee and all that. Man, Fiona... She really is diabolical. She's just sort of trying to, basically demoralize Yor into leaving. That's kind of a loaded question to ask. Like, don't you ever get tired of raising a child that isn't yours? I feel like that's a rather rude and presumptuous question to ask, but... Yor, being how she is, she just sort of, like, takes it at face value and it's like, no, I enjoy it. Oh dear, that's only gonna throw gasoline on the fire. Yor sort of admitting that she's not a particularly great mother. Boy, that's gonna set Fiona off. I can't believe she was even going to lie and say, like, oh, Lloyd complains about his wife at work. That's underhanded. So naturally, Lloyd seeing Fiona here, he assumes that there must be something going on. And indeed, that is the case. So this is interesting from a storytelling perspective, that they're sort of talking in code like that, and there's, two sets of subtitles, what they're physically saying and the meaning they're trying to convey. Naturally, all of this is useless with Anya around and able to read minds. I mean, that Fiona would say, is walking the dog really a necessary thing? As if to imply that Lloyd is wasting time, and that Yor isn't pulling her weight, as it were. Yeah, I mean, pretty understandably, this is starting to rub Lloyd the wrong way. Because, I don't think she means to imply that he's doing a bad job, but she's trying to drive a wedge between Lloyd and Yor. And, now it's becoming obvious why. Man, it's really serious when she says, I love you, instead of I love you. Oh dear. So here's the truth, Fiona has it bad. She can't help but imagine how great the mission would be if she could pretend to be Lloyd's wife instead. So this is kind of what I was saying about the character earlier. I feel like there's like a little nugget of something here that could be expanded on, like a character who joins the professional world with the sole goal of, getting a husband or something and being a housewife, but as a result, she's forced to put in long hours and stuff. I think that's ripe for a little bit of comedy and storytelling and stuff like that. And I mean, Fiona, she's basically like a side character. Almost a joke character, as we'll get to see later. You know, she sort of gets relegated to the same role as Yuri. Now, the interesting part about all of this is that at this point in time, only Anya is aware of Fiona's true motivations. I don't believe even Lloyd knows what's really going on inside her head, nor does anyone else. You know, everybody just sort of assumes she's this very shrewd, cold, calculating woman. And indeed she is, but she's also madly in love. So it seems like, unfortunately, that wedge she tried to plant is now seeming to work. And with her imagination, she obviously imagines that, like, you know, Lloyd would casually say, like, "Oh, Fiona, would you like to be my wife instead?" No doubt, Yor and Fiona are sort of imagining the same circumstance, albeit with different degrees of enjoyment. I mean, I guess the best part about all this is that it's utterly untrue. You know, Lloyd doesn't think like that. But only because the things he thinks about are so entirely different and divorced from romance. Now, this is one of the scenes I really like here, because it's really rich in dramatic irony. You know, Fiona knows that Lloyd likes black coffee, but now he's putting milk in his coffee, so what could that mean, you know? Did she not really know him as well as she thought he did, or is this part of his cover here, you know, as a doctor? No, you know, option C, none of the above. It turns out the coffee doesn't hurt his stomach so much if he adds a little bit of milk to cut down on the acid. And, you know, it's like little bits like that where the audience knows what's really going on and watches all the characters jump to conclusions with both feet. There's something special about that I really enjoy. Now, I think Fiona's sort of like diving off the deep end here when she says that she could have trained the child to catch the cup. You know, does she realize that Anya is technically like preschool age? Kids are not known to be coordinated. And in fact, you know, I don't know if it would necessarily be a good idea to give a child a cup without a lid or something. Especially when it's got, like, hot contents in it. You know, kids not known for being particularly fastidious. Oh, dear. So, Fiona's just laying it on thick, so Anya, she needs to play for the back rows word, like, boy, I really love my current mom. I don't want any other mom. I would be very sad. You know, just to really send the message at, like, hey, interloper, you're not welcome here. I mean, she's not being particularly subtle about it, but good stuff. You know, even when she's going off to play with the dog, you know, she can't help but lay it on real thick. Like, boy, I like my family exactly how it is. I don't want it to change at all. It's almost weird how Anya has inspired Yor to be a more dutiful wife. You know, as if this were like an issue that was actually being discussed. So now something's not adding up. You know, Lloyd is clearly appreciative of her efforts, and that, you know, Fiona would tell a different story means that somebody here is lying. So, you know, there's a good case to be made that Twilight could be lying here. being the spy that he is, and given that he gave this very advice to Fiona, don't let your real emotions show here. Wow, that was a poorly written line in the subtitle. That Hold on. In the manga, that line was supposed to be something more like, he's making a fake smile, but I can see that there's a little bit of sincerity to it. It was to imply that the smile was not totally fake. That The way they put that line in the subtitle just muddles the meaning of it. The idea here is that Lloyd was sort of violating his own rules and is becoming attached to the family when he shouldn't be. Huh. Well, naturally, Lloyd is still going to have to talk to Fiona about the mission that she came to talk about. They didn't actually exchange any information. She just sort of harassed Yor a little bit and discussed replacing her in the family. I do think it's interesting that Fiona has decided to walk out into the pouring rain like this. As if it might provide a little bit of camouflage. She's got a little bit of a pained expression there. So I guess Nightfall hasn't been relegated to being a comedy character just yet. She's still more of a melodramatic, kind of tragic character, where her love will remain unrequited. Now, it is interesting that she's sort of taking all of this and saying, it's like, yeah, Twilight, you lost your edge, you're not the master spy you once were. So, even if we don't end up getting together, at the very least, I'll be better than you. And maybe in doing so, I'll prove that I'm more worthy of your affection. So, I thought it was interesting that the credits started rolling so early, but it seems like, if I remember correctly, one of the smaller chapters is going to be adapted now. So, it's interesting that a children's cartoon is sort of dealing with death and all of that. Naturally, because the penguin just died on screen, Anya wants to spend time with her penguin. And, naturally, Bond is none too happy about this, being displaced by a penguin of all things. It is an interesting dynamic that there are essentially 4 intelligent creatures in this apartment here. So it seems like Bond wanted to emulate the TV show and decided to remove the competition that Mr. Penguin presented. I mean, it's pretty obvious who the culprit is. It doesn't take a magnificent intelligence. And that Anya can read minds really adds an extra layer to it. She can see Bond's reasoning behind it. It's just jealousy. But, she's also a kid. She can't be expected to respond rationally. I mean, fortunately, in the grand scheme of things, Mr. Penguin was only a stuffed animal, and they can be fixed. I mean, it's not like they can be fixed by Yor. She's much better at disassembling things. But, I'm sure Lloyd could take care of it, and even if he couldn't, I'm sure he has some agency contact. Some, master seamstress for the agency who could repair Mr. Penguin like nothing. I mean, he seems to be putting in an earnest effort. Why don't you go do some homework or study and I'll take care of Mr. Penguin? It is nice that he's doing it personally, I guess. That adds an extra dimension to it, that Lloyd would go... Well, it's not even going so far. I think it's like a basic thing, even if he's not considering the mission, which I notice he sort of rationalizes this less and less as time goes on. Doing this for the mission, it just sort of becomes doing this. This being something nice for Anya or nice for Yor. I mean, he did fix up Mr. Penguin, although he is a significant bit worse for wear. I almost hate to say this, but lying is kind of an important trait for a parent to have. I mean, maybe lying's too strong a word, but he's sort of saying that, Mr. Penguin, all these scars are honorable. He suffered in battle and he's come out the other side of it. I mean, that's not strictly true, it's a stuffed animal, but it's sort of like a mollifying thing he can say to, I guess, help Anya move on. I do think it's also nice, and it's sort of a display of Bond's intelligence, that he would bring essentially a peace offering in the form of a bag of peanuts. Because, dogs can display emotion like that, but I think an action like this really displays that Bond is on, a higher level of intelligence here. It's something interesting that we don't see too terribly much of. So there we go, one minor conflict solved. Now we just have to solve the Cold War, huh? Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.